I didn't expect to be stopped at the entrance to my own neighborhood, not by someone with flashing lights rigged to the top of an aging SUV. Not by a man in a half-tucked shirt that read Emphasis HOA Police, in bold stencil letters the kind you'd find at a costume shop. And certainly not by someone who raised his hand like a highway patrolman pulling over a semi. It was a Saturday morning. I had just gotten back from the hardware store, bags of mulch in the back, a few fence posts in the bed of my truck. The kind of day where you get dirt under your fingernails and feel proud about it. I slowed as I approached the gate to Emphasis, Woodbridge Crest, the suburban community my wife and I had lived in for almost a decade. The SUV was parked diagonally, hazard lights flashing, completely blocking the right-hand lane where residents usually enter. There was no signage, no reason. Just a man with mirrored sunglasses and a walkie-talkie slung over his shoulder like a toy. He stepped forward, holding out a gloved hand. I rolled down my window, eyebrows already raised. "Problem?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Name and address, sir," he said, voice clipped. "Excuse me," he tapped a clipboard, then pointed to a laminated badge clipped to his belt. It read, Emphasis Woodbridge Crest, HOA Enforcement Division. You're entering a restricted area under HOA Patrol Lockdown Protocol. We're conducting a visual inspection of vehicles entering and exiting the neighborhood for compliance. I stared at him. Lockdown Protocol. It's all in the updated community ordinance, he said, flipping a few pages on his clipboard. Section 12A, Proactive Detainment Procedures. That's not a thing, I said flatly. Sir, you are required to comply, or I'll be forced to file a violation for obstruction and potential trespassing. I looked at the man, mid-40s, military haircut, but none of the posture gut straining against the Velcro on his tactical vest. There was no badge number, no legal insignia, no city affiliation. You do realize, I said slowly, you can't detain someone on a public access roadway just because you're wearing sunglasses and carry a clipboard. This is private property, he snapped, stepping closer. You're required to obey community enforcement procedures, and right now I'm ordering you to stay in your vehicle while we verify your clearance. Clearance? I almost laughed. But instead I reached for my phone. Who are you calling? He barked, hand reaching toward the door like he had a right to grab it. My wife, I said, meeting his eyes. She's the one who usually handles threats like this. He smirked. I'll be happy to explain the regulations to her. I tapped the screen and hit the emergency contact button. 2 rings. Then her voice, calm, firm, and familiar. Emphasis. State Trooper Julia Moreno, badge 6342. Hey, Jules, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm being detained. Kind of. There was a pause on the line. By who? Someone claiming to be with the HOA police. He's blocking the entrance with his SUV and refusing to let me through until I give him personal information. Another pause. Stay on the line, she said. I turned the phone on speaker mode and placed it on the dashboard. The man was now pacing a few steps ahead of the vehicle, writing something on his clipboard like he was preparing a citation. Then came her voice again, this time, louder, directed through the speaker. Sir, you are currently engaging in unauthorized detainment on a publicly accessible residential road. Please identify yourself, your certification, and under what legal authority you are blocking this vehicle. The man froze mid-step, his head turned sharply toward the speaker. Who is this? I'm a sworn officer of the Arizona State Highway Patrol, she said, and I'm recording this call. You are not a law enforcement officer. You are not permitted to detain civilians. Step away from the vehicle now. He stepped back slightly, then straightened, trying to puff himself up. This is a matter of HOA internal regulation. There is no such legal thing as HOA, Detainment Authority. She cut in. I'm en route to your location. If you attempt to flee, you will be pursued. He scoffed. You can't talk to me like that. You're not here. She paused. But I will be. In 5 minutes. I watched his face. The color drained slowly from his cheeks. He stepped away from my truck, completely hand, now gripping his walkie like it might save him. I reached out the window and pushed open the gate button. The barrier lifted slowly. The road was clear. I started to pull forward. Don't go anywhere, he said quickly. I'm calling in your plate number. This isn't over. I looked at him. It is if you walk away right now. I pulled through. My heart was calm, steady like it always was in moments when the world around me turned upside down. That's what made me good in my old line of work, foreman in a crisis response team trained to deal with chaos while keeping the ground under my boots solid. But even for me, this was surreal. Back in my driveway, I waited on the porch sipping a glass of water. And sure enough, right on cue, the deep rumble of a State Patrol Dodge Charger pulled into view. My wife stepped out. Brown uniform, sunglasses, and a stride that made people nervous even if they didn't know who she was. She didn't even look at me first, just headed straight toward the fake officer who was still hovering near the gate, now trying to look occupied with his clipboard. She called out, "You, hands visible, turn toward me." He hesitated. "Now." And just like that, it began. The man didn't move right away. His hand hovered over the walkie-talkie like he was still considering his options, as if pressing that plastic button might somehow transform him into what he pretended to be. But my wife's voice, sharp, clear, and unmistakably official, left him no room. I said, "Turn toward me, hands where I can see them." Finally, slowly he turned. The bravado slipped just a little from his shoulders. He was sweating now, despite the shade, and his fake badge gleamed dully in the Arizona sun. Nothing more than plastic clipped to nylon. Emphasis. State Trooper Julia Moreno advanced with purpose. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her authority was earned, not worn, like a costume. Her hand rested near her holster, not a threat, just procedure, and her tone was pure procedure. "I am State Trooper Julia Moreno, badge number 6342. You are currently in violation of ARS 132411, impersonating a peace officer. You are also potentially in violation of unlawful restraint and detainment of a private citizen. Identify yourself now." He puffed his chest slightly. "I work with the HOA. I'm part of the Compliance Enforcement Division." "Do you have post-certification?" she asked, referencing the peace officer standards and training required by law. "No. But do you have authorization from city or county law enforcement to conduct vehicle stops?" "No, but this is private property. This is a publicly accessible road," she snapped, cutting through his last thread of justification. "You conducted a traffic stop, detained a driver, attempted to collect personal information, and threatened consequences. That is impersonation and coercion under Arizona state law." By then, a few neighbors had begun to gather, drawn out by the sight of the state patrol car and the unmistakable air of reckoning. Phones were out, cameras recording. The man looked around, calculating. I could see it on his face. Should I run? Should I talk my way out? Should I claim I was just volunteering? He made the worst choice possible. "You have no jurisdiction here," he said, voice trembling. "This is an HOA matter. You're out of line." Julia's expression didn't change. She stepped forward, calmly unclipping her handcuffs. "Place your hands behind your back." He laughed nervously. "You can't be serious. I was just enforcing community standards. This is harassment." Julia recited the Miranda warning word for word. Her tone was even rehearsed, but deadly serious. "You have the right to remain silent." The cuffs clicked shut behind his back. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." He tried to pull back, but she guided him gently yet firmly toward the patrol car, reading off the charges as onlookers watched in stunned silence. "You have the right to an attorney." One neighbor gasped. Another whispered, "Is it the guy who threatened to fine us over our garden trellis? If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided to you." I stood by the edge of my yard, arms crossed, watching, remembering the way he'd raised his hand to stop me, how he leaned into my truck window like he had any right. And now he was sitting in the back of a real police car. Julia closed the door behind him and turned to the small crowd. "For those of you who witnessed anything related to this individual attempting to issue citations, block driveways, or collect information, please report it to the State Patrol Office. A formal investigation is now underway." She turned back to me. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Better now." "Go get your phone," she said. "I want your dashcam footage." I retrieved it. She reviewed it right there on the hood of the patrol car, squinting slightly as the video showed the man's self-important approach, the clipboard waving the fake badge, shining in the sun. "This is more than impersonation," she muttered. "He blocked you, detained you, and tried to collect personal info. That's bordering on unlawful restraint. Do we know who he is? I asked. Not yet, she said. But we will. I looked down the street. More neighbors had come out now, whispering in clusters. Some of them waved to me. Others just nodded in silent thanks. The illusion was breaking. Julia took him downtown. I spent the rest of the day fielding questions from neighbors, from local reporters, even from one HOA board member who called to clarify that this was not an officially sanctioned action. I asked him why then the man had a uniform and a vehicle labeled emphasis HOA enforcement. He stammered, said something about an external vendor contract, then hung up. I knew then the board was going to deny everything, but I wasn't going to let that happen. That night, Julia called me from the station. We got his name, she said. Emphasis. Marcus DeWitt, former security guard. Fired 2 years ago for overstepping his role, literally tried to arrest someone outside his mall job. And the HOA hired him. We don't have that on paper yet, she said, but he admitted they gave him the vest, the clipboard, and instructions. Said he was told to keep the troublemakers in line. I felt my pulse rise. Guess who made the list, you, she confirmed. And a few others. Looks like you're not the only one he's confronted. Let me guess, Caroline Moore, Mr. Anil Patel. Exactly. It wasn't just a rogue incident. This was policy. Targeted intimidation masquerading as compliance. A private citizen acting like a cop. And an HOA board happy to look the other way, maybe even fund it. I sat on my porch that night alone with the hum of cicadas and the scent of creosote in the warm desert breeze. They had sent someone to scare me, but they forgot one thing. You don't intimidate the husband of a state trooper. The morning after Marcus DeWitt's arrest, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because my mind was already racing. The events from the day before hadn't yet settled into memory. They still pulsed like fresh bruises. I kept hearing his voice through my windshield, the clipboard slapping against his thigh. The entitled confidence of a man who thought a vest and a sticker badge could replace the law. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table while Julia got dressed for her morning shift. She was quiet but alert. The kind of alert that meant she hadn't really slept either. They let him post bail overnight, she said, tightening her duty belt. I figured as much. But don't worry. He's being watched, and the charges aren't going away. What about the HOA, I asked. She paused by the fridge, hand on the handle, face unreadable. They're going to say he acted independently, but he had their uniform, their vehicle decals. She looked at me over her shoulder. You'd be amazed how fast people run from responsibility when the cuffs come out. I nodded slowly. Then we don't wait for them to confess. We dig. She smiled a little. Now you sound like me. Once she left, I sat with my coffee and opened my laptop. The Emphasis Woodbridge Crest HOA website was its usual mess of dated fonts and passive-aggressive announcements. But I knew where to look now. The documents section housed all the minutes, budget reports, and contract approvals required by law to be public, though they were buried 5 clicks deep. I scanned the last 6 months of meeting minutes. There it was. Emphasis. March 14th, meeting summary. Approved board voted 4-1 in favor of temporary engagement of security consultant to assist with proactive enforcement during spring compliance sweep. No name listed, no contract linked. But buried in the next page was a line item from the financial report. Emphasis vendor MDW Oversight Solutions, $2,100. Month, contract, Nasha MC2144, MDW. Marcus DeWitt. They had paid him, regularly, with HOA dues, without disclosing to the community who he was, what authority he had, or how he was meant to operate. I sat back, heart hardening. They didn't just look the other way. They hired him. They gave him a title. They handed him the clipboard and the uniform and said, "Go keep order." And then he pulled me over in front of my own house. I saved the PDFs and sent them to Julia with the subject line, emphasis, proof of contract. She responded 2 minutes later, emphasis, got it, passing to legal. But that wasn't all I wanted to do. I opened my contacts and called Caroline Moore. She answered on the second ring. Morning, she said, cautious. It's me, I have news, I figured. The whole neighborhood is buzzing. I found the contract, I said. They hired DeWitt. They used HOA funds to pay him. She exhaled long and slow. Then they'll deny the board approved it. Not if we get the 5th vote. There had been 5 board members at the time of the contract approval. 4 voted yes, 1 dissented. The minutes didn't say who, I'll find out, she said. Leave it to me. We hung up, and I made my next call to Mr. Anil Patel. He picked up breathlessly. Are you seeing this? He asked. The HOA just sent an email blast saying unauthorized statements about security contractors are being reviewed by legal. Means we hit a nerve, I replied. You still have those violation notices from last month, every single one. He gave me 2 for non-standard mulch coloration and 1 for ambient light levels from my porch lantern. I thought it was satire. It wasn't. They were building a case against me, against anyone who ever dared speak up. We agreed to meet that afternoon. Patel would bring his documents, I'd bring mine, and then we'd start piecing together the pattern. But before that, I had one more thing to do. I returned to the gate. The same spot DeWitt had blocked me. This time there was no SUV, no clipboard, just quiet. I stood there a long moment. Then I noticed the camera, an old model, mounted high on a pole facing the entrance. Probably inactive for years. I stepped closer. There was a tiny sticker on the side. Emphasis property of Woodbridge Crest HOA, installed 2017. If it had been active, it might have caught everything. If they still had the footage, they'd be erasing it now. I took a photo, made a note, and emailed the HOA through their official contact form. Emphasis, subject request, for gate camera footage. Incident April 12th, 9:07 a.m. Emphasis, message. This footage is relevant to an ongoing legal case involving impersonation and detainment of a resident by a contracted individual. Please confirm the footage is preserved for review by legal authorities. Requesting access under state HOA transparency laws. No reply came that day, or the next. But Caroline called me the next morning. I found the dissenting vote, she said. Who Mrs. Elena Rivera, newest member, voted no and demanded a proper background check on DeWitt. The board overruled her. Can she confirm it? She already did. I've got her statement. My hands tightened around the phone. Then we take it to the city. Julia called an hour later. City's been looped in, she said. They're not happy. Especially since this guy's got a history and no guard card certification in the state. He shouldn't have even been allowed to set foot on duty. They're calling it duty now. She sighed. He claimed enforcement protocol in his initial statement, thought that would protect him. And he just confessed the HOA gave him the script. That afternoon, I filed an official complaint with the State Attorney General's office. Patel did the same. Caroline uploaded all our findings to a public Dropbox and shared it with the entire neighborhood mailing list. We called it Emphasis the Enforcement File. No drama, no accusations, just dates, signatures, payment logs, and law citations. Truth. And just like that, everything the HOA tried to hide began to unravel page by page, click by click. That night, the neighborhood felt different. Not quieter, if anything, it was livelier. Porch lights flicked on earlier. Conversations spilled from sidewalks. Dogs barked more freely. It was as if people were reclaiming something they didn't even realize had been taken from them, the right to, emphasis, relax in their own homes. I sat on the porch with Julia, both of us finally off duty in our own ways. She had changed into a worn t-shirt and sweatpants, but the sharpness hadn't left her eyes. Not after the week we'd had. She sipped from her mug. You know what he reminded me of? I looked over. DeWitt. She nodded. Guys we used to pick up off the interstate. Failed security guards. Washed out trainees. They show up in surplus uniforms they ordered online. Always the same look. Buzz cut, gone uneven, hands twitchy, this weird obsession with laminated badges and made-up authority. I said nothing, letting her talk. I pulled over one like him last year. Had a whole binder of fake citations he was issuing to truckers parked on the shoulder. Called himself a highway compliance ranger. I had to physically take the clipboard out of his hand. I laughed under my breath. Was it laminated? Of course it was. They always are. There was a moment of silence between us, warm and familiar. Do you think he's dangerous? I asked. She looked out across the lawn, expression tightening. He's small time. But the people who empowered him, yeah, they are. Because they knew better. The porch light buzzed above us, and I leaned back in my chair. It creaked the way old chairs do, comfortable, honest. We never saw it coming. Not really. I mean, HOA drama, we thought it meant someone complained about wind chimes or left their trash cans out. They weaponized it, she said. Gave it a badge. Pointed it at you. I tapped my fingers on the armrest. He thought I'd roll over. She gave me a look. Then he really didn't do his homework. The next day, I met with Caroline Moore and Mr. Anil Patel in the small public library off Pine Street. We chose it because it was neutral ground, no HOA meeting rooms, no board members lingering in the shadows. We spread everything out on a table near the windows, the board minutes, the financial disclosures, Caroline's handwritten timeline of events. And in the center was the contract Julia had helped obtain, DeWitt's engagement under MDW Oversight Solutions. I slid the paper closer. It's signed by the board president, and it allocates HOA funds without a full member vote. That's illegal under Section 1812 of the state HOA statutes. Patel nodded. I cross-checked it. They tried to bury it under temporary services and rerouted the funds through discretionary maintenance. Caroline added, and the kicker, there's no public disclosure that MDW was a sole proprietorship run by DeWitt himself. I stared at the name. The signature was messy but unmistakable. Emphasis, Daniel Kraus, HOA board president. He was the same man who once fined Patel for painting his shutters a distracting shade of blue and who had publicly scolded Caroline for allowing trick-or-treaters after 900 p.m. I say we go public, I said. Caroline hesitated. That could bring lawsuits. Let them try, Patel said. Everything we have is verifiable. We don't frame it as revenge, I added. We present it as what it is, an abuse of trust and a danger to every family who thought HOA meant keeping lawns trimmed, not deputizing thugs. Caroline reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of envelopes. What are those? I asked. Invitations, she said, to a special community assembly next Saturday. Not an HOA meeting, a real one. One where people can speak freely, ask questions, and if they choose, vote on whether this board still represents them. We distributed them by hand, one by one, door to door. By Thursday, word had spread like wildfire. Even residents who normally avoided involvement, retirees, young couples, the renter across from the park, who never said a word, were talking about the truth meeting. I even saw a teenage girl stapling a flyer about it to the community bulletin board by the pool. On Friday afternoon, as I stood in my driveway checking the mail, a black BMW rolled up and stopped beside me. The tinted window rolled down to reveal a pale, balding man with watery eyes and a mouth that always seemed half a second away from condescension. Daniel Kraus, afternoon, he said, as if we hadn't been digging into months of shady contracts he'd signed. Daniel, I said evenly, I hear you're stirring up a lot of trouble. I hear you hired a fake cop, I replied. He smiled thinly. You don't understand how complicated HOA management is. Sometimes we have to act quickly. Quickly is one thing. Secretly is another. Illegally. That's a whole different problem. His smile faded. You're playing with fire. I crossed my arms. You think I'm scared? No, he said. I think you're naive. And I think I said, stepping forward, you underestimated how many people were quietly keeping receipts and how loud quiet people can get when you push them too far. His jaw tightened. Then he drove off without another word. That night, I sat on the couch next to Julia. The TV played something we weren't really watching. Her hand found mine. You ready for tomorrow? She asked. Always, I said. Because I knew what came next. They had the money, the lawyers, the titles. But we had something stronger. The truth, and a community finally ready to fight for it. Saturday morning dawned clear, cloudless, and just cool enough to draw people outside. From the moment I stepped onto my front porch, I knew this day was different. You could feel it in the way garage doors opened earlier than usual, the way neighbors lingered in their yards instead of rushing off. People weren't hiding today. They were waiting. By 4:30 p.m., the park near the central fountain, emphasis Woodbridge Green, was full. Folding chairs scraped across pavement, kids ran barefoot in the grass, and the air buzzed with the quiet murmurs of residents, hungry for answers. The HOA board, to their credit, showed up. Or maybe they were just afraid not to. Daniel Kraus stood with two of the other original board members near the flagpole. No podiums, no microphones. Just an informal, undeniable reckoning. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back, his gaze flickering from face to face, like a man trying to find allies and not seeing any. David Moreno stepped forward. Caroline Moore and Anil Patel flanking me and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. This meeting was called not by the board, but by the residents of emphasis Woodbridge Crest. We've lived under silence for too long. But after what happened last week, after what's come to light about enforcement contracts, private patrols, and the use of HOA funds, without disclosure, many of us feel it's time to speak up. Kraus interrupted. "You're mischaracterizing. Let him finish," a voice from the crowd called. It was Mr. James Bennett, a retired Navy man from the East Cul-de-sac. He didn't raise his voice often, but when he did, it carried. Kraus pressed his lips together and fell silent. I continued. "No one here is saying we don't need structure or that rules don't matter. But when those rules become weapons when someone is detained at the gate to their own home by a man with no legal authority, wearing a badge bought online, hired with our money, that's not governance. That's intimidation." I pulled a folder from my bag and held it up. These are the contracts, the board minutes, the invoices, the payment logs to MDW Oversight Solutions owned by Marcus DeWitt, the man who impersonated law enforcement and was arrested by my wife, emphasis, State Trooper Julia Moreno. There was a quiet gasp at the mention of her name. She stood just outside the park, in plain clothes, arms crossed, watching, not intervening, just present, a reminder. Caroline stepped forward next, and we have a statement from Mrs. Elena Rivera, the only board member who voted against the engagement of this security consultant. She asked for a background check. She was ignored. Patel spoke last, pointing toward a poster board we had mounted on an easel. It displayed a simple timeline of events, hiring dates violations, issued known confrontations, including mine. "This isn't about one man," he said. "This is about how far an HOA will go when residents are too afraid or too exhausted to question authority." The crowd murmured. People were nodding now. The truth had weight, and it was shifting the mood, grounding it in something real. Daniel Kraus raised his hand. "I didn't approve intimidation tactics," he said. "This was about compliance, curb appeal, safety." Caroline replied sharply, "Safety isn't detaining people at gunpoint. Safety isn't a man with no license pulling people over and demanding papers." Kraus took a step forward, grasping at ground that was already sliding out from under him. "We've followed procedure. The board approved the expenses." Patel gestured to the timeline. "Without disclosure. Without a vote from dues-paying members. That's a violation of Article 4, Section 9 of the bylaws. I have a legal team reviewing this," Kraus started. "You might want a criminal defense team instead," someone muttered from the crowd. Laughter followed. It wasn't cruel. It was cathartic. Then a woman named Lena Carter stood up. She was new to the community, a young mother, a nurse, always polite, rarely involved. She raised a printed copy of the flyer the HOA had sent out earlier that week. "I got this in my mailbox," she said. "It says the disruption is being handled internally. That this assembly was unauthorized. I've never felt safer in this neighborhood than I do right now, surrounded by people finally telling the truth." A round of applause broke out. Light at first, then stronger, sustained. Kraus shrank with each clap. I stepped forward once more. "This is what community looks like," I said. "Not fear, not silence, not fake patrol cars and clipboards, just neighbors protecting each other the right way, openly, honestly, and starting now, legally." Then I raised a motion loud and clear. I moved that we call for a full board vote of no confidence in the current leadership of the HOA, effective immediately pending special elections under city supervision. Caroline seconded it. Patel thirded. A sea of hands rose. Residents, renters, veterans, first-time homeowners. Even Mrs. Elena Rivera, standing off to the side, raised her hand tearfully. We recorded the names the count. It was nearly unanimous. Daniel Kraus turned to leave. But before he could disappear, I called out. "One last thing, Daniel." He stopped. "You might have forgotten the oath we all take when we move in here to protect the integrity of the community. You betrayed that. We didn't." And with that, he walked away. By sundown, we had volunteers lined up for temporary committees, a vote scheduled, and legal paperwork in motion. But more than anything, we had something we hadn't felt in years. Hope. It wasn't over. But the tide had turned. By Monday morning, Emphasis Woodbridge Crest was no longer the same neighborhood. The HOA office, once quiet and intimidating, with its smoked glass doors and indifferent clerks, now stood hollow. The previous board had all resigned or been formally removed through emergency votes by the residents. Daniel Kraus's nameplate had been taken down. The MDBU oversight SUV was gone towed by city order after the arrest of Marcus DeWitt. But the scars were still fresh. We spent the first 2 days doing damage control, listening to residents collecting statements, documenting incidents that had previously gone unreported. Stories poured in. A widow who had been fined for her inappropriate garden gnome later found out DeWitt had entered her backyard to take a photo without her knowledge. A teenager detained at the community pool because her swimsuit violated visual standards. A father of 3 threatened with a lien because of a play structure visible from the street. All signed by HOA enforcement. All enforced by someone who never had a badge. Julia spent her days off helping the city's legal team sort through DeWitt's prior contracts. The man had worked illegally for 3 other HOAs under fake or lapsed security certifications. In one case, he even carried an airsoft sidearm with the orange tip painted black. It was pure luck nothing worse had happened. And yet there he was, working our GOT clipboard in hand, emboldened by the silence of a board that knew better. By Wednesday afternoon, Julia got the call she was waiting for. The state had issued a formal charge list against DeWitt, Emphasis, impersonating a peace officer, unlawful restraint, trespassing harassment, and operating without a private security license. Even more damning. The investigation into Kraus revealed that he had personally reimbursed DeWitt for uniform costs, $237.50 using a petty cash fund intended for landscaping emergencies. The receipt had been stapled to a handwritten note, Emphasis, be visible. Keep the loud ones in check. He had tried to shred it. But someone had saved a scanned copy on the HOA's shared drive under the folder titled Emphasis Events. Julia printed it and pinned it to our fridge. Badge versus real badge, she said, tapping the corner. The next day, I hosted a workshop for residents at the community center. Topic: Emphasis. Know Your Rights, HOA edition. Julia stood at the front with me dressed in civilian clothes, a small notepad in hand. She introduced herself with calm authority. "I'm not here today as your neighbor's wife," she began. "I'm here as someone trained to distinguish between legal enforcement and weaponized fear." The crowd was larger than expected. At least 60 residents sat in folding chairs, some with notebooks, some just with curiosity. We broke the session into 3 parts. Emphasis. Understanding HOA boundaries. What your association can and cannot enforce. Emphasis. Signs of impersonation. How to recognize fraudulent authority uniforms and intimidation tactics. Emphasis. What to do if you're targeted. Recording, reporting, and reclaiming your voice. Julia walked everyone through real examples, including my case, and emphasized the most important rule of all. Emphasis. You are never required to comply with someone who cannot prove legal authority, period. A few elderly residents asked about past incidents. One had even paid a warning fee in cash, believing DeWitt was an actual officer. Julia took their statements for the city records. Then, during the Q&A, a young man in the back raised his hand. "Why didn't anyone stop this earlier?" he asked. "I mean, it wasn't hard to tell something was wrong." Silence settled in the room. Caroline finally spoke. "Because fear works, especially when it wears a uniform," I added, "and because most of us trusted the board to act in our best interest. But trust without transparency is just hope. And hope isn't a system." That night, we received an email from the city legal department. They were officially opening a broader investigation, not just into, emphasis Woodbridge Crest, but into several other HOAs across the county. DeWitt's arrest had uncovered a trend unlicensed enforcers hired to handle difficult residents, all under the guise of compliance. Emphasis. Woodbridge had become the spark. By Friday, the press had picked it up. Emphasis. Headline: Fake Cops Real Power. The suburban crackdown on HOA overreach begins in Woodbridge. They interviewed Julia on the evening news. Her calm dismantling of the phrase HOA police became a viral soundbite. Emphasis. Police don't answer to clipboards, they answer to law. And then came the kicker. One of the HOA's internal communications had been leaked a group email thread between board members discussing ways to discourage dissent. In it, Krause had typed, emphasis. If we keep the optics strong enough, people won't ask questions. But we had asked, and now they couldn't stop the answers. Saturday morning brought with it a surreal calm. The kind of silence that isn't born of peace, but of people collectively holding their breath. The neighborhood looked the same: lawns, trimmed mailboxes, standing straight American flags fluttering slightly in the breeze. But everyone knew something had changed. At 10:12 a.m., it happened. The same black SUV that DeWitt had used to block me at the gate rolled slowly down Sycamore Lane. It still had the faint peeling vinyl that read, emphasis, HOA enforcement, on the sides, though someone had tried poorly to scratch it off. Behind the wheel, emphasis, Marcus DeWitt, released on bail, wearing the same tactical vest, same mirrored sunglasses, driving slowly casually like nothing had happened. I was working on a gutter when I saw him. At first I thought it couldn't be him. No one would be that brazen. But as the vehicle crept past Caroline's house, then Patel's slowing at every fourth mailbox, my gut told me what logic couldn't. He was back, and he was sending a message. I called Julia. No answer. Then I remembered she had a shift that morning. She'd handed off her personal phone to the department for evidence backup, but she had promised if DeWitt showed his face again, she'd be notified. So I waited, and I filmed. The SUV came around again 10 minutes later. This time it stopped in front of our house. He stepped out. Not fast, not threatening, but with the smug casualness of someone daring us to flinch. The clipboard was back. The pen clipped at an angle. He glanced at my mailbox, then began scribbling something. I walked to the edge of my driveway. He looked up and smiled like a kid who'd just broken a vase and was proud of it. You again, he said. You shouldn't be here. I'm still under contract, he replied. Until I'm told otherwise, I have a duty to... You have no authority, I snapped. You were arrested, charged, you're under investigation. I've been advised to continue until my status is clarified, he said smoothly. Board directive. There is no board, I said. It's been dissolved. He smirked. Doesn't look like it from here. And then came the sound I'd been waiting for. A cruiser. No sirens, just that low, unmistakable hum and flash of red and blue in the periphery. Julia's unit pulled up right behind the SUV. She stepped out. Not rushed, not angry, just emphasis, ready. I watched her approach DeWitt from behind, calm, calculated. Marcus DeWitt, she said loudly so the neighbors could hear. You are in violation of your pretrial release. You were instructed not to engage in any enforcement activity while under active investigation. DeWitt didn't turn around. This is my neighborhood, he said almost softly. I live here. I'm volunteering. That's not illegal. She was inches away now. You made a traffic stop. You wrote a citation. You stepped onto private property with false authority. And you were warned not to repeat these actions. He looked at her over his shoulder. I'm not going anywhere. Good, she replied. That makes this easier. And with that, she grabbed his arm, turned him, and in one practiced motion snapped the cuffs around his wrists. Gasps echoed down the street. A few porch doors creaked open. A child's voice whispered, "That's the guy who yelled at my dad." Julia read him his rights again, slowly and clearly. DeWitt tried to interrupt, muttering something about overreach about orders from the office, but she didn't stop. She guided him into the back of the cruiser and shut the door with finality. The moment hung there charged, unspoken. I looked around and saw Patel recording with his phone. Caroline had come out with a small group of neighbors. No one cheered, no one jeered, but you could feel the relief like cool water in the middle of a desert. Someone behind me whispered, "Took long enough." Julia walked up to me after securing DeWitt inside. "Pretrial violations are going to get him revoked," she said. "He won't be walking around here anymore." I exhaled. "You always know just when to show up." She gave me a tired smile. "He shouldn't have shown up on my street." An hour later, the HOA Interim Committee released a public statement, emphasis. Effective immediately, all contracts with MDW Oversight Solutions are terminated. We are cooperating fully with state and city investigations. We acknowledge a failure in oversight and commit to reform. But for most of us, the statement didn't matter. What mattered was what happened on that street under the sun in front of witnesses. A fake badge met a real one. A bully met a boundary. And a man who thought fear was power got cuffed on the same patrol route where he tried to play God. That night, the neighborhood gathered for a bonfire at Emphasis Founders Green. Kids roasted marshmallows. Patel brought speakers and played old blues records. Caroline passed out homemade cookies, and I just sat beside Julia, watching the glow reflect off her face, listening to her quiet laughter as she finally let the tension go. "Think it's over?" I asked. She looked around. Neighbors laughing, lights twinkling. DeWitt's SUV impounded for good. "For now," she said. And that was enough. By Monday, Emphasis, Woodbridge Crest had settled into a new kind of rhythm. The kind where people walked slower, waved more freely, and checked over their shoulders just a little less. The threat was gone for now, but beneath the surface, everyone knew we weren't finished. Marcus DeWitt had been arrested again, but the roots of the problem weren't just in his clipboard or fake badge. They were buried deeper. Julia and I spent that morning at our dining table, with a pile of printed documents between us. She had taken a personal day, and I'd cleared my schedule. Not for rest, for research. DeWitt's arrest had triggered a cascade of background requests from the city's legal office. Julia had gotten early access to some of the files, and with permission shared them with me for neighborhood transparency. What we found made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He'd been fired from no less than 4 private security companies in the past 8 years. Each dismissal for overreach of authority, failure to follow protocol, and once for physically detaining a resident in a gated community in Nevada for unauthorized mailbox color. The pattern was crystal clear. He wasn't just a guy who liked rules. He was a man addicted to control he could never earn through official channels, so he built himself a costume of authority and walked through neighborhoods acting like a sheriff in a western no one asked to watch. Even worse, 3 of those companies had contracts with HOAs, none of which conducted thorough background checks. They took his resume at face value, handed him keys and polos with security embroidered on the chest, and looked the other way when complaints started stacking up. I traced one connection further. A community called Bridal Hill Estates in Southern California. DeWitt had worked there for 7 months unpaid, claiming to be part of a volunteer patrol. He issued dozens of citations, none legally binding, many of which led to residents paying fake fines. Sound familiar? The Bridal Hill HOA later claimed they had no knowledge of his activities. And just like that, he vanished until he popped up at Emphasis Woodbridge Crest. "Same pattern," I muttered. Julia leaned over my shoulder, sipping coffee. "He tests the limits, finds the weak spots, fills them with fake uniforms and fear." She flipped to a report from a smaller HOA in New Mexico Sand Dunes Reserve. "Look at this. 3 months of gate logs, and DeWitt signed in as External Enforcement Liaison. That title doesn't even exist. Who keeps hiring this guy?" I asked. Julia was quiet a moment, then said, "People like Kraus." That led us to another rabbit hole. Daniel Kraus, the now former HOA president, hadn't just been the one who signed DeWitt's contract. He had a long history of lobbying for expanded community authority in online HOA forums. He wrote blog posts about civilian enforcement solutions, advocated for the use of private patrols, and once even praised the idea of soft uniform presence in neighborhoods to deter undesirable behavior. His digital trail painted the picture of a man obsessed with HOA power, not governance, not service, but power. Control through intimidation, disguised as order. We cross-referenced emails Caroline had forwarded from her time on the board. In one, Krause complained about residents who think their property rights supersede the vision of the board. In another, he referred to Patel as the non-compliant nuisance in the Blue Shutters house. Julia read those lines and said quietly, "He created DeWitt. He just didn't expect DeWitt to get caught." That afternoon, Caroline hosted a meeting in her garage, informal residents only. About a dozen of us sat in folding chairs, among paint cans and gardening tools. "I've been digging too," she said, holding up a stack of printed emails. "I filed a formal records request with the HOA's legal firm," she added. They released communications that show Krause authorized DeWitt to access the member database. He had our addresses and names, phone numbers, everything. People around the room murmured. A few faces paled. "And it gets worse," she said. One email includes instructions from Krause to DeWitt. Emphasis: target residents who have spoken against compliance policy in past meetings. Create a visible enforcement pattern. Visible enforcement pattern. That wasn't a directive. That was a hit list. Lena Carter raised her hand. "He came to my door last month, asked if my children were creating disturbances in the alley with their chalk drawings." There was silence. Then someone else said, "He warned me about a flag I hung up for my brother in the Navy. Said it wasn't aesthetically approved. It was all the same. Not random. Not isolated. Deliberate." We agreed that night to form a formal investigation committee independent of the board. We'd work with the city, gather witness reports, build a case not just against DeWitt, but against the system that enabled him. I volunteered to lead it. Caroline took the role of records coordinator. Patel as financial reviewer. Julia, though not officially part of it, promised to channel reports through the state's law enforcement fraud task force. That night, I sat back on my porch with the committee charter in hand. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a blueprint for restoration. A quiet wind passed through the trees. Then my phone vibrated. A new email. From a former board member, anonymous. Emphasis. Subject. This goes deeper. Emphasis. Attachment. HOA Council 2020. Meeting transcript PDF. I opened it and read the first line. Emphasis. If we control the gate, we control the people. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. This wasn't over. But we had our flashlight, and we were no longer afraid of the dark. The leaked transcript didn't just shine a light, it blew the entire house of cards into the open. What started as a quiet search for accountability was now growing into something much larger. The PDF labeled Emphasis HOA Council 2020 was meeting transcript. PDF was over 40 pages long, a raw, unedited record of an off-the-books meeting between Daniel Krause and a group of representatives from other HOA boards across the county. And every line dripped with the kind of language that made your skin crawl. Emphasis. Residents don't understand structure. They respond to visibility, not logic. Emphasis. If we frame it as community integrity, we can write the rules later. Emphasis. Enforcement is more about impression than legality. If they think it's a real badge, that's enough. Emphasis. Outsource the mess, then deny it. Julia read it twice, jaw clenched, breath slow. She didn't speak until she reached the final page where Krause mentioned the Emphasis Woodbridge Protocol, an internal document outlining steps for compliance escalation, including driveway stops, visual intimidation, and repetitive citations to pressure behavior correction. It was calculated, cold, structured, and it wasn't just us. The transcript named 4 other communities, some as far as 2 hours away, that had adopted similar enforcement enhancement strategies. We had stumbled into a network. By Monday, we delivered the full file to the city council. Julia arranged a meeting with the county sheriff's office. Caroline and Patel forwarded copies to HOA watchdog organizations and legal reporters. Then we got a call from Emphasis, the Phoenix Times. The reporter's voice was calm but electric. "We'd like to do a feature, not just on DeWitt, but on your neighborhood, on you." I hesitated. "This isn't about me." "No," she said. "It's about all of you, and how your neighborhood fought back." We agreed. The article ran under the headline, Emphasis, the fake cop, the real trooper, and the neighborhood that said no. It was an instant hit, syndicated within days, and the fallout was immediate. City investigators raided the former HOA office at 6 a.m. the next morning. They left with 3 hard drives, 15 boxes of files, and a plastic bin labeled Community Integrity Toolkit. Inside, fake badges, laminated compliance forms, even traffic cones labeled Emphasis, HOA Zone. The county declared an emergency audit of all HOA operations in Emphasis, Maricopa County, and surrounding counties. 3 other associations terminated contracts with similar enforcers. One even issued a public apology. But the biggest blow, Daniel Kraus was arrested. The charges: Emphasis, fraud, misuse of community funds, conspiracy to impersonate law enforcement, and unlawful surveillance. Turns out he'd authorized hidden cameras near playgrounds and community mailboxes justified as security improvement, but never disclosed. He used HOA funds to pay DeWitt and others through disguised maintenance invoices rerouted through a shell company called Emphasis Crestline Solutions, which he secretly owned. Caroline found the paper trail. Patel confirmed the account led to a private fund in Krause's name. It was a takedown that shook the entire county HOA system. At the next town hall, we met under the string lights at the park, now officially renamed Emphasis Moreno Green. The committee stood together not on a stage, but among the crowd. I stepped forward with a clipboard in hand, not for citations, but to collect volunteer names. "We were told the system couldn't change," I said, "but we're standing on ground that proves it already has." Applause. This community, I continued, was never about spotless sidewalks or fence heights. It was about people, families, trust, and we let that trust get twisted into fear, but not anymore. We passed a vote that night overwhelmingly for a new community charter. Emphasis: no enforcement role without certified law enforcement training. Emphasis: all contracts must be reviewed by residents. Emphasis: all HOA meetings must be recorded and publicly posted. Emphasis: and any intimidation, coercion, or manipulation by board members results in immediate removal. A new HOA board was elected, diverse, resident-led, term limited. And for the first time, people cheered not because they feared the rules, but because they understood them. Later, Julia and I sat on our porch watching the stars emerge, one quiet light at a time. "Do you think they'll try again?" I asked. "Not here," she said. "Not with what we've built." I nodded. She squeezed my hand. "I just can't believe it took a fake cop," she added, smiling faintly. "To remind people what real law looks like," I said. "No," she corrected gently. "To remind them what real Emphasis community looks like." And she was right. It hadn't started with law. It had started with fear. But it ended with people. With porch conversations. With late-night emails. With quiet nods of agreement and bold decisions made by ordinary neighbors who had finally had enough. In the end, we didn't just stop DeWitt. We exposed something bigger. We lit a fire. And we rebuilt Emphasis, Woodbridge Crest, not with fences or fines or fear, but with truth. 3 months later, you'd never know. Emphasis, Woodbridge Crest, had once been ruled by fear. There were still reminders, of course. The gate at the entrance no longer had that cheap HOA enforcement sticker peeling off the post. It had been replaced with a simple, elegant sign that read, Emphasis, Welcome Home Community First. The old security camera was upgraded not to spy, but to protect, and it came with a full transparent policy posted online. We didn't ban structure. We refined it. The new HOA board was made up of actual residents, teachers, veterans, small business owners, and one teenage student rep who wrote a proposal for a skate ramp in the park and got it approved on our second try. Everyone was required to attend a community code of conduct workshop before running for office. The workshops were hosted by none other than Carolyn Moore, who had unofficially become the heart of the reform. Patel had helped us rewrite the budget so clearly that even a sixth grader could track expenses. Every line item was now visible online, and any resident could submit suggestions, concerns, or questions with guaranteed 48-hour responses. Me. I took the job no one wanted, street maintenance liaison. Twice a month, I walked the neighborhood with a clipboard not to judge, but to ask. Emphasis. Do you need help patching that sidewalk crack or, emphasis, want to coordinate a yard work day? People responded not with fear, but with laughter. Even the mailbox committee, once notorious for passive-aggressive paint tone memos, had reinvented itself. Now they gave out, emphasis, Mailbox of the Month awards, and offered free touch-up paint and help to anyone who asked. Julia and I walked every evening now, hand in hand. We greeted people by name. She'd often stop to talk with kids, reminding them about bike safety or asking about school. She wasn't the trooper anymore. She was emphasis, Julia, the woman who stood up when it counted. DeWitt's trial made the news. He took a plea deal. 18 months reduced to 10, with time served and probation. His plea statement included an apology, but most of us knew it wasn't about remorse. It was about avoiding the full weight of justice. Daniel Kraus didn't get off so easily. With evidence of fraud, illegal surveillance, and shell corporations, he faced a federal investigation. His assets were frozen. His name scrubbed from the HOA's archives, not out of spite, but because he never deserved to be there in the first place. But the most powerful moment came at the annual community picnic. It was always held at the park, now officially renamed emphasis Moreno Green, by unanimous vote. Julia tried to decline, of course. It's too much, she said. I didn't do this alone. But everyone insisted. That day, under a banner that read, emphasis Better Together, she was handed a simple plaque by the youngest resident of the neighborhood, a boy who had once hidden behind his mother when DeWitt approached their house. The plaque read, emphasis, to the one who protected us from the ones who pretended to. Julia teared up. So did I. So did half the people in the park. Later that night, after the sun had dipped, and the paper lanterns glowed softly across the grass, we stood at the edge of it all. I still remember the first day I said, "You in that uniform walking toward him." Calm, unshaken, she smiled. I wasn't calm, I was furious. "But you didn't flinch." "No," she said, "because someone had to show him what real authority looks like." "And what does it look like?" I asked. She turned to face me. "It looks like doing the hard thing quietly, and not needing to be thanked for it." We stood there a long time in silence. Emphasis, Woodbridge. Crest was still a neighborhood of mailboxes and porch swings, still full of lawn chairs and garden hoses, and wind chimes tinkling in the evening air. But now, it was also something more. A place that remembered. A place that, emphasis, chose. To speak up. To organize. To reclaim its own story, and to remind everyone who came through its gates, this isn't just a neighborhood, it's a community. And no one wears a badge here unless they've earned it.